I never expected that a pulled hamstring and a bag of lukewarm ice would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny, isn't it? How we build these neat, orderly little worlds for ourselves, with predictable routines and carefully managed expectations, only to have them completely upended by the smallest, most unexpected things. For me, that thing was Caleb, and a single, melting cube of ice. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was a junior in college, on a soccer scholarship I felt I barely deserved. I wasn't a bad player, not really. I was just quiet. In a world of loud, boisterous athletes who communicated in a language of backslaps and boisterous laughter, I was an observer. I existed on the periphery, a silent satellite orbiting the blazing sun of their camaraderie. I did my drills, played my position, and retreated back into my shell the moment the final whistle blew. My life was a steady rhythm of classes, practice, studying, and sleep, a quiet hum of existence that I had curated to keep loneliness at bay, or at least to keep it from feeling like a failure. The soccer team was my job, my ticket to an education. I appreciated the opportunity, but I never quite felt like I belonged. The locker room was the epicenter of this feeling of otherness. It smelled of damp earth, sweat, and cheap deodorant, a potent cocktail of raw masculinity that always made me feel like I was holding my breath. The air was thick with inside jokes I didn't get and stories about weekend parties I was never invited to. I would change quickly, shower faster, and escape before the noise became too much. And in the center of that universe, the gravitational core around which everything and everyone else revolved, was Caleb. He was our captain. Of course he was. He had the kind of effortless confidence that made people want to follow him. He was tall, with broad shoulders from years of training and a mess of dark, unruly hair that he was constantly pushing out of his eyes. His laugh was loud and genuine, and it echoed through the locker room like a promise that everything was going to be okay. From my quiet corner, I watched him. It was a habit I couldn't break. I watched the way his jersey stretched taut across his back when he reached for something in his locker. I watched the easy grace in his movements on the field, a fluid dance of power and precision. I watched the way he would encourage the freshmen, a kind word here, a friendly punch to the shoulder there. He was, in every sense of the word, the golden boy. And in my mind, he was untouchable. He was the kind of guy who had a pretty, smiling girlfriend waiting for him after every game. The kind of guy whose life was as perfect and straightforward as a penalty kick. He was everything I wasn't, and a secret, painful part of me was hopelessly drawn to him. My fascination was a silent, one-sided affair, a movie I played only for myself. I collected small, insignificant moments like treasures, the time he smiled in my general direction, the time his hand brushed mine as we both reached for a water bottle. Each one was a tiny spark that I would nurse in the quiet of my dorm room, fanning it into a brief, warm fire of impossible hope before letting it die out. It was a safe way to feel something without risking anything. He was straight. He was the team captain. I was just Lucas, the quiet guy on the wing. That was the established order of our universe, and I had no intention of disturbing it. Life, however, had other plans. It always does, doesn't it? You can draw all the lines you want, but sometimes the game just moves in a direction you never anticipated. It happened during a late afternoon practice, one of those grueling sessions under a hazy, oppressive sun that drains the will as much as the body. We were running a final scrimmage, and I was pushing hard, trying to prove I deserved my spot, as I always was. I lunged for a pass, stretching just a bit too far, and a sudden, sharp, searing pain shot up the back of my thigh. It felt like a guitar string snapping. I crumpled to the turf, the world narrowing to a single point of blinding agony. The whistle blew. The game stopped. I remember the coach jogging over, his face a mask of professional concern. Hamstring. I gasped, clutching the muscle that was now bunching into a tight, angry knot. It wasn't a catastrophic injury, not a season ender, but it hurt. It hurt in a deep, throbbing way that made my eyes water. The verdict was swift. No more practice for at least a week, and ice. Lots and lots of ice. Two of my teammates helped me hobble off the field and into the locker room, their support more functional than compassionate. They deposited me onto a wooden bench and then, with a few half-hearted pats on the back and promises to see you later, they disappeared into the showers, eager to wash away the day and get on with their lives. I was left alone with the throbbing in my leg and the familiar, sinking feeling of being an afterthought. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the locker room slowly fade. The clang of locker doors, the hiss of the showers, the loud banter. It all receded, leaving behind a dripping faucet and the low hum of the ventilation system. The pain in my leg was a constant, pulsing reminder of my own vulnerability. I tried to stand, to get to the trainer's small office where the ice machine was. But the moment I put weight on my leg, the muscle seized again, and I sank back onto the bench with a pained groan. I was trapped. It was almost pathetic. I felt a flush of embarrassment, even though there was no one left to see me. I was just about to resign myself to sitting there until the muscle relaxed, or until the janitor came to kick me out, when the door to the shower swung open. It was Caleb. He had a towel slung low on his hips, his hair dark and slick with water, his chest and shoulders still glistening. He stopped when he saw me, his usual jovial expression softening into one of genuine concern. For a moment, he just stood there, and the silence in the room felt enormous, charged with a strange new energy. "Lucas, I thought you'd gone home," he said, his voice softer than I was used to hearing it. It wasn't the captain's boom, it was just a voice. A nice one. I gestured lamely toward my leg. Pulled my hamstring. Can't really walk on it. I hated how weak I sounded, how needy. He frowned, a small crease appearing between his eyebrows. "Did you ice it? Coach said you needed to ice it right away." "I was going to," I admitted, feeling my cheeks grow warm. "But the trainer's office is a long walk right now." He didn't laugh or make a joke. He just nodded, a serious, thoughtful expression on his face. "Stay put," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll get it for you." And with that, he turned and walked toward the trainer's office, the confident, easy stride I'd watched from afar 1,000 times. But this time, he was walking for me. And in that moment, the entire axis of my quiet, orderly world began to tilt. He returned a minute later, not just with a bag of ice, but with two. He'd also grabbed one of the elastic wraps from the first aid kit. He knelt in front of me, the tile floor cold against his bare knees. It was such an unexpected position for him to be in, the team captain, kneeling at my feet. The proximity was startling. I could smell the clean, soapy scent from his shower, see the individual droplets of water clinging to his eyelashes. My heart started beating a frantic, unsteady rhythm that had nothing to do with the pain in my leg. "Okay, let's see," he murmured, his voice low and focused. He gently took my leg, his hands warm and surprisingly careful as he lifted it to rest on the bench. My entire body went rigid. His touch was firm but gentle, a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble contact of the game. This was different. This was deliberate. "Just tell me if this hurts." I could only manage a small shake of my head, my throat suddenly tight. He positioned the plastic bag filled with sharp, crackling ice against the back of my thigh, his fingers brushing against my skin as he adjusted it. The sudden, biting cold was a shock, but the shock of his touch was 1,000 times more potent. Every nerve ending in my body felt like it was on high alert, cataloging the brief warmth of his hand, the pressure of his grip. He worked in silence for a moment, wrapping the elastic bandage around my leg to hold the ice pack in place. He was surprisingly deft, his movements efficient and sure. He wasn't just doing a favor, he was taking care of me. The thought was so foreign, so overwhelming, that I felt a dizzying mix of panic and exhilaration. "There," he said, finishing the wrap and securing it. He looked up at me, his face just inches from mine. His eyes, a shade of hazel I'd never been close enough to notice before, were searching mine. "Is that too tight?" "No," I managed to whisper. "It's perfect. Thanks." He didn't move away. He just stayed there, kneeling in front of me, his gaze steady. The usual noise of the locker room was gone, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. In that quiet, the space between us felt incredibly small and incredibly significant. It was just the two of us, surrounded by rows of empty lockers and the ghosts of our teammates. The whole world had shrunk to this one bench, this one shared moment. "You know," he started, his voice still quiet, almost hesitant. "I pulled my quad my freshman year. It was the first game of the season. I thought my whole career was over before it even started." I was surprised by the confession. Caleb didn't talk about things like that, about moments of weakness or fear. He was the unshakable one. Really? I never knew that. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Yeah, well, it's not exactly something you brag about, you know? I was terrified. Cried in my dorm room for like an hour. He looked away for a second, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features before he masked it again. It's stupid, but the pressure. It gets to you. Hearing him admit that, hearing him confess a fear so similar to my own constant anxieties, was like seeing a statue step down from its pedestal. He wasn't just the golden boy, the confident captain. He was a person, with insecurities and a past that included fear and tears. It made him suddenly, breathtakingly real. My carefully constructed image of him, the one that kept him safely in the category of unattainable, began to crumble. It's not stupid, I said, and the words came out with more conviction than I expected. I get it. I feel like that pretty much all the time. He looked back at me, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. It was different from his usual wide, public grin. This one was smaller, more intimate. Yeah? I never would have guessed. You always seem so calm on the field. So focused. I almost laughed. Calm. Focused. If only he knew the storm of overthinking and second-guessing that was constantly raging inside my head. It's an act, I admitted. Most of the time I'm just trying not to mess up. Aren't we all? He said softly. He finally sat back on his heels, then pushed himself up to sit on the bench next to me, leaving a respectable but still thrillingly small distance between us. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the dripping of the faucet and the faint crackle of the ice against my leg. It wasn't an awkward silence, though. It was comfortable, companionable. After a few minutes, he nudged my uninjured leg with his. You're a really good player, Lucas. I mean it. You have this way of seeing the field. It's different. Smart. The compliment landed in my chest with a warmth that spread through my entire body, chasing away some of the cold from the ice pack. It was one thing to hear praise from a coach. It was another thing entirely to hear it from Caleb, especially now, in this quiet, unguarded moment. Thanks, Caleb. That means a lot, coming from you. His hand was resting on the bench between us. I stared at it, at the strong, capable fingers and the neatly trimmed nails. I had an almost overwhelming urge to reach out, to just touch it, to see if it was as warm as I imagined. It was a crazy impulse, and I curled my own fingers into a fist on my lap, fighting it down. But then, as if he could somehow read my mind, his pinky finger twitched, brushing against my own. It was the smallest, most fleeting of touches, probably an accident, a random muscle spasm. But my heart leaped into my throat. I didn't pull away. I stayed perfectly still, every part of me screamingly aware of that one tiny point of contact. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the slow, steady passage of time. 20 minutes. The recommended time for icing an injury. The cold on my leg had seeped deep into the muscle, turning it numb. The initial biting pain had subsided into a dull, distant ache. We had spent the entire time just talking, our conversation meandering from soccer to classes to professors we both hated. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had, and it felt more natural than any of the stilted, superficial exchanges we'd had over the past 3 years. Caleb seemed to realize how much time had passed. Coach would say it's time to take that off, he said, his voice pulling me out of my reverie. He shifted, turning to face me more directly on the bench. Let's get you propped up on the table in the trainer's room. It'll be more comfortable. He stood and offered me a hand. I hesitated for only a second before taking it. His grip was strong and warm, engulfing my own. He easily pulled me to my feet, and I leaned on him heavily as we made the slow, awkward journey to the small adjoining room. He was patient, matching my limping pace without a word of complaint. The feeling of his arm around my waist, his body heat seeping through my shirt, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I tried to focus on the mechanics of walking, on putting one foot in front of the other, but all I could think about was the solid, reassuring presence next to me. The trainer's room was small and sterile, dominated by a padded examination table. It smelled of rubbing alcohol and athletic tape. Caleb helped me swing my legs up onto the table, his hands guiding me with that same surprising gentleness. I lay back, my head resting on the crinkly paper that covered the vinyl padding. The ceiling was a boring landscape of acoustic tiles and fluorescent lights. Better? He asked, standing over me. Yeah, much, I said, my voice a little breathless. He reached down and began to carefully unwrap the elastic bandage. His knuckles brushed against my skin, sending little jolts of electricity through me with every pass. When the bandage was off, he lifted the bag of ice. It was mostly just a bag of frigid water now, the ice reduced to a few sad, floating chunks. He was about to toss it into the nearby trash can when he paused. He looked down into the bag, a strange, thoughtful expression on his face. Hold on, he said softly. He tipped the bag, letting the cold water drain into the bin until only one thing remained. It was a single, perfect ice cube, stubbornly clinging to existence. It was almost transparent, beautifully clear. He plucked it from the bag, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. He looked at me, and his eyes held a look I couldn't decipher. It was a mixture of curiosity and something else, something deeper and more intense. There was a hint of a playful smile on his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was serious, almost questioning. My breath caught in my chest. What was he doing? Hold still, he whispered, the command barely audible in the quiet room. And then, he leaned over me. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to protest, to tell him to stop. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the intensity in his gaze. He lowered his hand, the ice cube held like a precious jewel, until it was hovering just above my chest, right over my sternum, right over my heart. For a heart-stopping second, he just held it there. And then, he gently placed the ice cube on my skin. The shock of the cold was instantaneous and absolute. It was a tiny, localized explosion of sensation that made me gasp. It was so cold it almost burned. I watched, unable to move, as the heat of my body immediately began to wage war on the ice. A tiny bead of water formed, then another, and then a slow, cold trickle began to trail down my chest, tracing a path between my ribs. Caleb didn't look away. His eyes were locked on the melting ice, his expression unreadable. He was completely focused on that one small point of contact, as if he were conducting a delicate, vital experiment. The world seemed to slow down, the silence in the room pressing in on us. I could feel my own heartbeat, a frantic, hammering pulse directly beneath the spot where the ice was turning to water. It felt like he could feel it too, like he was measuring the rhythm of my panic and my hope. The trail of cold water was a shockingly intimate caress, a stark contrast to the burning heat that was blooming all over the rest of my skin. It was the most deliberate, terrifying, and beautiful thing anyone had ever done to me. The moment stretched on, feeling like both an eternity and a split second. The ice cube shrank, losing its battle against my body heat, until it was just a sliver, and then nothing. All that was left was a small, cold puddle and a single, glistening trail of water marking its path. Only then did Caleb finally pull his hand back. He blinked, as if waking from a trance, and the intensity in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden wave of uncertainty. He looked at me, then at the wet spot on my chest, and a faint blush crept up his neck. He straightened up abruptly, taking a half-step back from the table. The spell was broken. The air, which had been thick with unspoken meaning, was suddenly crackling with awkwardness. He cleared his throat and shoved his hands into the pockets of his shorts, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically defensive. Sorry, he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. That was weird. I don't know why I did that. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a chaotic jumble of questions and sensations. Was it weird? Yes, but it was also something more. I could still feel the phantom cold on my skin, the ghost of that deliberate touch. I just lay there, propped up on my elbows, staring at him as he stared at the floor. You should probably get that wrap back on, he said, his voice strained and unnaturally loud in the small room. He gestured vaguely toward the bandage on the counter. And you should probably have someone drive you home. I can do it if you want. The offer hung in the air between us. A moment ago, it would have been a dream come true. Now, it felt fraught with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. Before I could answer, he shook his head quickly. Actually, you know what? I have to go. I forgot I have to meet someone. For a project, the excuse was so flimsy, so obviously fabricated, that it was almost painful to hear. Just take it easy with that leg, okay? And with that, he turned and practically fled from the room, leaving me alone with the humming lights, the smell of rubbing alcohol, and the lingering, cold dampness on my chest. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall until they were gone, swallowed up by the silence. I slowly sat up, my own reflection a pale, confused face in the darkened window. I touched the spot where the ice had been. It was just skin now, warm to the touch. But everything had changed. He had touched me, not as a teammate helping an injured player, but as something else entirely. And now, he had run away. Hope and fear waged a brutal war inside me, and I had no idea which one was going to win. The days that followed were a masterclass in awkwardness. The easy, newfound companionship we'd shared in the locker room vanished, replaced by a strange and charged distance. We went from sharing secrets on a bench to avoiding eye contact across a field. When we were forced into proximity during team meetings or warm-ups, the air between us felt heavy, thick with everything that had happened and everything that had been left unsaid. I saw him watching me sometimes. I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck and turn to find his gaze fixed on me from across the room, his expression a complicated knot of confusion and something else I couldn't name. The moment our eyes met, he would look away, his jaw tight. It was a stark contrast to his usual open, confident demeanor. He seemed as lost as I felt. My internal monologue, always a busy place, went into overdrive. I replayed the ice cube incident 1,000 times, analyzing it from every conceivable angle. It was like watching a single frame of a film over and over, hoping to find a new clue, a hidden meaning I'd missed before. The deliberate way he'd moved, the intensity in his eyes, the whisper of "hold still," these weren't the actions of a guy who was just being weird, were they? Hope was a dangerous, seductive voice. He felt something, it would whisper. That wasn't an accident. No straight guy does that. He was testing the waters, seeing how you would react. This line of thought filled me with a dizzying, terrifying excitement. It painted a future where the untouchable team captain was not so untouchable after all, a future where my secret, silent affection might actually be returned. But fear was always there to shout it down. "You're delusional," it would sneer. He literally said it was weird, and then ran away. It was a prank, a bizarre jock brain fart, and now he's embarrassed and probably thinks you're a freak for not laughing it off. You're reading your own hopes into his actions. He's straight, Lucas. He's Caleb. And you are going to destroy any chance of a normal friendship if you don't let this go. I was caught in a brutal cycle of interpretation and self-doubt. Every small interaction became evidence for one side or the other. If he said hi to me in the hallway, Hope would seize on it as proof that he was trying to reconnect. If he walked past without a word, fear would declare victory, confirming that he was avoiding me. I was exhausted, my emotional state swinging wildly from one extreme to the other based on the flimsiest of evidence. My pulled hamstring was healing, but my heart felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. The tension between us didn't go unnoticed. One of our teammates, a loudmouth defender named Mark, cornered me by my locker one afternoon. "Hey, what's up with you and Caleb?" he asked, his tone more curious than malicious. "You guys seem weird around each other lately. Did you have a fight or something?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "No, nothing," I said, trying to sound casual, dismissive. "He's just busy with captain stuff, I guess. And I've been focused on my leg." Mark shrugged, seemingly accepting the flimsy explanation, but the question rattled me. If other people were noticing, it wasn't just in my head. The dynamic had shifted in a real, observable way. The silence between Caleb and me was becoming a presence of its own, a character in our story that was growing louder every day. I knew something had to give. This state of limbo was unsustainable. I considered trying to talk to him, to clear the air, but what would I even say? "Hey, remember that time you melted ice on my chest? What was that about?" The thought made my skin crawl with embarrassment. So I did nothing. I retreated further into myself, my silence a shield against potential heartbreak. I decided it was better to live with the unanswered question than to risk getting an answer I didn't want to hear. I would let it fade. We would go back to being captain and teammate, and the memory of that moment in the trainer's room would become another one of my secret, hoarded treasures, tinged with the bittersweet pain of what might have been. The breaking point came about a week later. My hamstring was feeling much better, and I had just been cleared to participate in a full practice. The relief of being back on the field, of losing myself in the familiar rhythms of the game, was immense. For 90 minutes, I didn't have to think. I just had to run, pass, and play. After practice, I was one of the last ones in the locker room again, taking my time, stretching my leg carefully. I was so focused that I didn't hear him approach until he was standing right beside my locker. I looked up, startled, to find Caleb standing there, looking more nervous than I had ever seen him. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, uncertain vulnerability. He wasn't wearing his captain's mask. This was just Caleb. "Lucas," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Can we talk? For real this time." My heart did a painful somersault in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. I could feel the blood draining from my face. All I could do was nod, my throat too tight to form words. "Not here," he said, glancing around the empty locker room as if the walls themselves were listening. "Come on." He led the way out of the building and across the manicured lawns of the campus, toward a secluded little garden tucked away behind the library. It was a place I often went to read, a quiet sanctuary with stone benches and overgrown rose bushes. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows and painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. We sat on a cold stone bench, a careful foot of space between us, the silence stretching out. He was the one who finally broke it. He took a deep, shaky breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. "Look," he started, staring at his own hands, which he was twisting in his lap. "About the other day, in the trainer's room. I know I acted like a total idiot." "It's okay," I mumbled, my default setting of deflecting and minimizing kicking in. "No," he said, looking up at me, his hazel eyes intense and serious. "It's not okay. I ran away, and I've been avoiding you all week, and that's not fair to you. I'm sorry." "I get it," I said quietly. It was a weird moment. I offered him the out, the easy explanation we could both agree on and move past. But he shook his head, a determined look on his face. "That's the thing, Lucas. It wasn't just a weird moment. I mean, it was weird, but it wasn't just that." He took another breath. "I've been thinking about it all week. About everything. About why I did it." My entire body was tense, braced for impact. I waited, hardly breathing. "I've been trying to figure myself out for a while now," he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost confessional. "This whole idea of who I'm supposed to be. The team captain, the jock, all of it. It's like a costume I've been wearing for so long I forgot what's underneath." He finally looked directly at me, his gaze unwavering. "And then I'm around you. And you're different. You're quiet, and you're real. You don't put on an act." And I realized, I don't want to put on an act around you either. He paused, and the confession I had been simultaneously hoping for and dreading finally came. "The truth is," he said, the words coming out in a rush, "I like you, Lucas. A lot. I think I have for a while, but I kept pushing it down, telling myself it wasn't possible, that I was just confused." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "But then you got hurt, and I had this excuse to just be with you. And in that room, I don't know what came over me. Seeing you lying there. I just wanted to connect. To do something that wasn't just words." My mind was reeling, trying to process the beautiful, terrifying honesty of his words. He liked me. Caleb liked me. The impossible hope I had tried so hard to crush was blooming in my chest, huge and brilliant and painful. "I get it if you think I'm a freak," he continued, misinterpreting my stunned silence. "I get it if you don't feel the same way. I couldn't keep living in this weird silence. I had to tell you." A surge of adrenaline, of courage I didn't know I possessed, finally broke through my shock. "No," I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. "I don't think you're a freak." I looked at him, at this brave, terrified, wonderful person who had just torn down every wall between us. And I let my own walls crumble. "Caleb," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I like you too. I have for a really long time. I just never, ever thought you would." My voice broke. A wave of relief so profound it was almost visible washed over his face. The tension in his shoulders eased, and a slow, wondrous smile spread across his lips. It was the best smile I had ever seen. He closed the small distance between us on the bench, his knee pressing against mine. "Really?" he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Really? I confirmed, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me, a laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction.